What's going on, everyone? Mitesh here, and today we are going to be talking about the Galaxy A51 and the cameras on it specifically because, cameras are some of the most important things about a phone, and this phone is rocking 5 total cameras. And this is video from the front-facing camera. As you guys can see, it can record actually up to 4K 30 frames per second, which is really impressive, but it has no image stabilization at all, so this footage might be a little shaky, so we'll have to see what it's like in post. But yeah, this is front-facing camera video, so there you guys have it. I'm gonna turn it down to 1080p so you guys can see that too. Alright, this is a video recorded with the front-facing camera at 1080p, scaled up to 4K, but yeah, this is what you guys can expect, and what you guys can of course expect from the microphones too. So yeah, there you guys have it. It looks pretty good to me. It looks a little overexposed maybe, but I think it looks pretty good. Now we're going to switch over to the back cameras. Now, of course, there are 4 back cameras, but only 2 that you can record with, the regular wide and the ultra wide. The macro you can't use. It's only 5 megapixels anyway, so you probably don't want to use it. And the other one's just a depth sensor, so you can't use that one. So let's check out what the back cameras can do. Alright, so now I'll switch it up to the back cameras, and the back cameras also record in 4K 30 frames per second, and as you guys can see at 4K there is no stabilization, so this is some pretty shaky footage. Now this is from the main lens, is the 48 megapixel sensor, so it looks pretty good, but yeah, definitely the amount of shake is kind of crazy. So I'm going to switch over to the ultra wide so you guys can see what that one looks like too. Alright, now we're in with the ultra wide sensor, and you guys can already see it's such a marked improvement from the regular one because it's so wide, you don't have as much of that shake because it's compensated by the fact that it's wide. So that's kind of nice to have. But yeah, alright, so this is a video from the ultra wide sensor at 4K from the Galaxy A51. Now we're going to switch it up to 1080p so you guys can see what that stabilization looks like. Okay, so now I've turned it down to 1080p, have the stabilization turned on so you guys can see what that looks like. Now, of course, we're back to the regular wide sensor. You can't do ultra wide video stabilized, so yeah, you're stuck with just the wide if you want the stabilized video. Now, I will say this thing is super stabilized. Like, there is a delay that I'm noticing when I'm looking at the footage itself, but at the camera rather, but yeah, otherwise this thing looks great, and it's way better than the 4K footage that I was getting. Okay, so next up we have a quick little autofocus test. So there you guys have it. This is focusing on the earbuds, and you can see it's a little bit slower, but honestly it feels like a much more deliberate focus, and I kind of like that over those super fast focuses on flagship phones. So I don't know, it's fast, but it's not super fast. Alright, so next up, let's do a little bit of a low light test. So this is the front-facing camera again, 4K 30 frames per second. You can see the sun has not quite set yet. It's still a little bright outside, but inside my apartment it's a little bit darker, and the camera really struggles in low light, especially for videos and actually even for photos too. So this is 4K 30 frames per second. I'm gonna switch it over so you guys can see the 1080p as well. Alright, so here we are with the 1080p footage. It should look a little bit better since we might be doing some pixel binning. I actually doubt it, but hoping it looks a little bit better than the other one did, but I don't have much hopes for it. I feel like there's just a lot of noise in this footage that I'm taking, so yeah, that is what it is. Okay, so we're back to shooting with the rear camera, and you guys can see it's still really bright outside, but inside it's relatively dark, and this room is a complete mess. This is where I keep all the stuff that I'm about to review, but here you guys have it. Look, you guys can take a look at this. This is the JLab. This is what I use for the autofocus test, and you guys can see the video quality here is just not great, even though it's still relatively bright outside. Video quality here, I would say, is just pretty poor. But yeah, this is the 4K 30 frames per second. I'll go ahead and switch over to the ultra wide so you guys can see what that looks like now. Okay, and you guys can clearly see right from when you switch over to the ultra wide, it is ridiculously wide, and it's got a lot worse color reproduction. So you guys can see the darks are here, over here, and over here are just way darker, and like you can barely make out what this says. Like, this is not very good video at all. Yeah, so the ultra wide I would not count on in low light at all. The main camera is a little bit better than this, but the ultra wide is just pretty poor in low light situations. You guys can see. You guys can expect some new reviews coming up here. They got the Jabra 75T, the JLab, and the Anker Soundcore Flare. Yeah, if you guys want to see any of those video reviews, make sure you guys subscribe so you guys don't miss any of those. Okay, and now I've got the Super Steady 1080p video turned on, and you guys can see it actually looks worse. Oh my god, it looks so much worse on this. So yeah, you guys can see in the viewfinder, the lag is so much more noticeable when it's lower light. But yeah, this is what you guys can expect with in low light with super steady. Okay, so at the risk of making this video super long, we of course have to talk about photography with these cameras, and considering how many cameras there are and how many modes there are, this is gonna be a long one. So let's start off by talking about the front-facing camera. So this front-facing camera is actually a 32 megapixel sensor, which is kind of ridiculous. Most cameras are 12 or 8 megapixels for the front-facing camera, but this one is 32 megapixels. Now, in good lighting, this thing can produce some pretty decent images. However, with bad lighting, the camera tends to just make your face look all splotchy, and it just does not look that good. I'm not saying you can't turn out good, decent pictures, but you're not really going to be super happy with these pictures. And of course, you also have front-facing portraits, and they look actually surprisingly good. I think that Samsung has done a really good job with their portrait software, and you can get some really decent-looking portrait shots. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the main camera on here, the 48 megapixel wide sensor. Now, this camera can produce some of the best images you can get out of this phone. So the images are super bright, they're very detailed, and then they have great color saturation. Now, I won't say that they're the best cameras out there. They definitely have a Samsung look, but I think the Samsung look works for social media, as we saw in MKBHD's blind camera phone test last year. The Samsung Galaxy S10 won out because they produce the brightest and most colorful images, and it really works well for social media. So I think if you get this camera, you really will have no problems getting some pretty good images. That is, unless you're in low light conditions. In low light, this camera tends to struggle. Even though there is a dedicated night mode, I find that most pictures tend to come out either really grainy or very soft, and it's just not up to the scale of what other major flagships can do. So that part is a little disappointing. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the ultra-wide camera on this phone. It's a 12 megapixel sensor, and I find it to be a significantly worse camera than the 48 megapixel one. Now, I will say, the fact that you have this, the fact that you have a whole new perspective is really awesome, and it is a really wide camera compared to the normal one, but the color matching between the two cameras is so bad that you really can't expect to get the same picture out of the ultra-wide versus the wide. So even if you're in a situation where you're like, oh, the ultra-wide will help, the ultra-wide will get a very different picture than what you will with the regular one. The colors on it tend to be a little bit more saturated and just look unnatural. Additionally, on the ultra wide lens, there is a lot of softness towards the edges, and you will definitely notice a little bit of a fisheye effect if you're in like a narrow environment. So overall, I find the camera useful, but I don't find it as good a quality as the main sensor, so that is something to know. And then last and definitely least is the macro camera on here. So the macro camera is just a 5 megapixel sensor behind it, and it is, I don't know, it's not very useful to me personally, so I haven't found that many uses for it. It does take some okay pictures in really, really good lighting, but in anything less than ideal lighting, it tends to take some pretty bad pictures. So yeah, I don't know what to use this for, but it is there in case you guys need something like this. Okay, so there you guys have it. That is a not so quick look at what the cameras on the Galaxy A51 are capable of. They take some actually pretty good pictures and videos in good lighting, okay ones in bad lighting, but you know, that is what you can expect at this price point. Now, the only other phone that I think can really compete with this is of course the Pixel 3a in terms of camera quality, but then you're giving up stuff in terms of like the full screen and stuff like that, so that is worth noting. But yeah, that's pretty much it for this video. Like this one if you liked it, subscribe if you guys loved it, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Bye!